The night my son threw me out of his house, the rain felt colder than anything I had ever known. I stood on the front lawn clutching a worn suitcase while water soaked through my sweater. My son, Ethan Perkins, the boy I had raised alone, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, pointed toward the street and told me I was no longer welcome in his life. Behind him, his wife Vanessa watched without saying a word. I thought the worst pain a mother could feel was losing her husband. I was wrong. Then, as I stood trembling beneath the storm, a black Bentley rolled slowly to the curb, the window lowered, and a voice I hadn't heard in more than 40 years softly said, "Bonnie, get in. You're not alone anymore." If this story touches your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me until the end. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this. And before we continue, tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own child turned their back on you also? Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'd truly love to hear from you. My name is Bonnie Perkins, and before the night my son threw me out into the rain, I truly believed I had lived a life filled with purpose. Not an easy life, not a perfect life, but a meaningful one. I was 68 years old when everything fell apart. For most people, that age is supposed to be a season of peace. A season of grandchildren, family dinners, and quiet mornings with coffee on the porch. Instead, I found myself standing alone in a storm, wondering where I'd gone wrong. I'd gone. To understand how I ended up there, you need to understand how much of my life I gave away for one person, my son, Ethan. The day Ethan was born was the happiest day of my life. I still remember holding him in the hospital in Columbus, Ohio. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine so tightly that I laughed through tears. Richard, my husband, stood beside me with the biggest smile I had ever seen. "He's going to do great things someday," Richard whispered. Back then, our future looked bright. Richard worked as a firefighter. I taught second grade at a local elementary school. We didn't have much money, but we had enough. More importantly, we had each other. Our house wasn't large. It was a simple 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood filled with maple trees and friendly neighbors. Every evening, Richard would come home from work, and the three of us would sit together at the dinner table. Looking back now, those ordinary evenings were the richest moments of my life. But happiness can disappear without warning. One cold November morning, everything changed. I was teaching a reading lesson when the principal quietly entered my classroom. The expression on his face told me something was terribly wrong. He asked another teacher to take over my class. Then he led me into his office. I remember my hands shaking before he even spoke. A firefighter had come to the school. There had been an accident. Richard had been responding to a warehouse fire. Part of the building collapsed. He never made it out. Even now, decades later, I can still hear the sound that came out of my mouth when they told me. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a cry. It was something deeper. The sound of a heart breaking. Ethan was only 12 years old, too young to lose his father, too young to understand why life could be so cruel. For months afterward, he barely spoke. I would hear him crying in his room late at night. Sometimes I sat outside his bedroom door and cried with him, but I never let him see it. Because someone had to stay strong. And that someone was me. From that moment on, my life became centered around one mission, giving Ethan every opportunity possible. I worked during the day, then I tutored students in the evenings, during summers. I taught extra classes. There were years when I barely slept, years when every dollar mattered. Years when I skipped buying things I needed because Ethan needed something more. A new pair of shoes, school supplies, sports equipment, field trips, college savings. I always chose him. Always. There was one memory that still stands out. A few years after Richard died, our washing machine broke. I had just enough money saved to replace it. The same week, Ethan came home carrying information about a science camp. His eyes were glowing with excitement. "Mom, I really want to go." The camp cost almost exactly what I had saved. That night I sat alone at the kitchen table. I looked at the numbers over and over again. Then I filled out the registration form. For 6 months afterward, I washed our clothes at a laundromat. I never told Ethan. I didn't want him feeling guilty. I wanted him dreaming. Because parents are strange that way. We can survive almost anything if it helps our children move forward. As Ethan grew older, he became a good student. A hard-working young man. At least, that's what I believed. He played baseball. He stayed out of trouble. He earned decent grades, and every time he accomplished something, I felt proud, not because I wanted credit, but because it made all the sacrifices feel worthwhile. The hardest sacrifice came during his senior year of high school. Richard had given me a diamond anniversary ring years before he died. It wasn't extravagant, but it was the most valuable thing I owned. I wore it every single day. One afternoon, Ethan received acceptance letters from several universities. I was overjoyed. Then reality arrived. Tuition, housing, books, expenses. The financial aid wasn't enough. I spent weeks trying to find another solution. There wasn't one. Eventually, I drove to a jewelry store. I sat in my car for nearly 30 minutes before going inside. When the jeweler examined the ring, I nearly changed my mind. But then I pictured Ethan's future. I pictured the opportunities waiting for him, and I sold it. The moment I walked out of that store, I cried, not because of the money, because it felt like saying goodbye to one more piece of Richard. Still, I never regretted it, not then. Ethan graduated from college with a business degree. The day he walked across that stage, I thought my heart would burst with pride. I remember standing in the crowd and clapping until my hands hurt. Richard should have been there. He deserved to see that moment, but I told myself he was watching somehow. That he knew that he was proud too. After graduation, Ethan found work in real estate sales. He was ambitious, confident, charismatic. Clients liked him. His career grew quickly. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. Maybe all the hard years were behind us. Maybe life was finally going to be easier. I even started thinking about retirement. Simple things, gardening, traveling, reading books I never had time to read, maybe visiting the ocean again. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't entirely focused on survival. I had no idea that while I was dreaming about peaceful retirement, the foundation beneath my family was already beginning to crack. At first, the changes in Ethan were small. so small that I ignored them. A canceled dinner, a forgotten phone call, a birthday card that arrived late, nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, just little things. But sometimes the biggest storms begin with the smallest clouds, and I was about to discover that the son I thought I knew was slowly becoming someone I no longer recognized. If you had asked me years ago whether I believed a stranger could come between a mother and her son, I would have laughed, not because I thought it was impossible, because I thought Ethan would never allow it. After everything we'd been through together, our bond felt unbreakable. For a long time, I truly believed that. Then Ethan met Vanessa. At first, I was happy for him. He was 34 years old by then and deeply focused on his career. While many of his friends were married with children, Ethan spent most of his time working. When he called me one evening and said he wanted me to meet someone special, I was thrilled. I spent hours preparing dinner. I cooked his favorite roast chicken, made homemade mashed potatoes, baked an apple pie from scratch. I wanted everything to be perfect. When Ethan arrived, Vanessa walked in beside him. She was beautiful, tall, elegant, perfectly dressed, the kind of woman who seemed to belong on magazine covers. She carried herself with confidence, maybe even a little too much confidence, but I ignored that feeling. I wanted to like her. More than that, I wanted her to feel welcome. After all, if Ethan loved her, I wanted to love her too. The first dinner went well. At least on the surface. Vanessa smiled often, complimented my cooking, asked polite questions, told funny stories. When they left that evening, Ethan looked happier than I had seen him in years. I remember standing at the front door watching them drive away. I smiled to myself. Maybe this was the beginning of a wonderful new chapter. Unfortunately, first impressions can be deceiving. The small signs started appearing a few months later. At first, they were easy to dismiss. Tiny moments, little comments, things that seemed harmless. One afternoon, I invited Ethan and Vanessa over for lunch, while Ethan stepped outside to take a phone call. Vanessa wandered through the house. Eventually, she stopped in the living room and looked around. Her eyes moved slowly across the furniture. The photographs, the curtains, the old hardwood floors. Then she smiled. Not a warm smile, a different kind of smile. This house feels very dated. I laughed politely. Well, it's been in the family a long time. She nodded. You could probably get a great price for it if you sold. Something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable, not because selling the house was unusual, but because she sounded more interested in its value than its history. I quickly changed the subject. At the time, I thought I was imagining things. I wanted to believe I was. Months passed. Ethan proposed. The wedding was beautiful. I cried during the ceremony. Not sad tears, happy tears. I was watching my son build a future. Every parent dreams of that moment. I even helped pay for part of the wedding expenses. It depleted much of my retirement savings. But I didn't care. Seeing Ethan happy felt worth every penny. After the wedding, however, things slowly began to change. The weekly phone calls became less frequent. Family dinners happened less often. Holidays felt different. Not dramatically different, just enough to leave a strange ache in my chest. Sometimes Ethan seemed distracted when we talked. Sometimes he sounded impatient. Sometimes it felt like he was speaking to me out of obligation rather than affection. Still, I made excuses for him. He's busy. He's adjusting to married life. He's under pressure at work. That's what mothers do. We explain away the warning signs because the truth hurts too much. About a year after the wedding, Ethan and Vanessa started talking about moving. They wanted a larger home, a more upscale neighborhood, a place that reflected Ethan's growing success. At least that's what they said. One evening, they invited me to dinner. The restaurant was expensive. Far more expensive than the places we usually visited. I remember feeling slightly out of place. After we ordered, Vanessa began discussing real estate, luxury neighborhoods, property values, investment opportunities. She seemed obsessed with status, with appearances, with what other people thought. Then she casually asked a question. "Bonnie, have you ever considered selling your house?" The question caught me off guard. "Not really." "Why not?" I smiled. "Because it's home." She exchanged a quick glance with Ethan. Something passed silently between them. A look I couldn't quite interpret. Ethan quickly changed the subject, but the moment stayed with me. Weeks later, I visited their apartment unexpectedly. I had baked Ethan's favorite blueberry muffins, the same recipe he'd loved since childhood. When Vanessa opened the door, she seemed surprised to see me, not pleasantly surprised, annoyed. "Ethan isn't home." "Oh," I said. "I was just dropping these off." She looked at the container. "Thanks." There was an awkward silence. Then she sighed. "Can I be honest with you?" I smiled nervously. "Of course." She folded her arms. "Ethan worries about you." "Oh, yeah." That confused me. "Worries about me?" "You're getting older." I stared at her. I was only 65 at the time, healthy, independent, still driving, still active, still working part-time. "What exactly are you saying?" She gave me a sympathetic smile that felt anything but sincere. "I'm saying maybe it's time to start thinking about your future." The conversation left me unsettled. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Fear. Not fear of Vanessa herself. Fear of what she represented. A growing influence over my son. An influence I didn't understand. Over the next 2 years, that influence became impossible to ignore. Whenever Ethan and I disagreed about something, Vanessa somehow appeared in the background. Whenever Ethan changed his opinion, it always seemed to align with hers. Whenever family plans changed, the decisions benefited her. The transformation happened slowly enough that Ethan probably didn't even notice it himself. But I did, because I knew my son. Or at least I thought I did. One Christmas, I witnessed something that shook me deeply. The entire family had gathered at my house. Dinner was nearly ready. Everyone was laughing. For a brief moment, things felt normal. Then Ethan accidentally knocked over a glass of wine. It spilled across the tablecloth. A tiny mistake, nothing important. But Vanessa immediately snapped at him. Her voice was sharp, embarrassing, humiliating. The room fell silent. I waited for Ethan to defend himself. Instead, he apologized repeatedly, like a child being scolded. Something felt wrong, very wrong. On the drive home afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That wasn't the confident young man I'd raised. That wasn't the Ethan I remembered. The changes became even more obvious after they purchased a larger home. The mortgage was enormous. The property taxes were high. Their lifestyle became increasingly expensive. Luxury cars, exclusive clubs, and designer furniture, lavish vacations. The spending never seemed to stop. Whenever I asked Ethan how things were going financially, he brushed off the question. "We're doing great, Mom." But his smile never reached his eyes. And sometimes, when he thought nobody was looking, I noticed something troubling. Stress. Real stress. The kind that keeps people awake at night. The kind that grows in silence. The kind that eventually demands payment. Then one afternoon, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I hadn't meant to listen. I truly hadn't. But as I approached the kitchen during a family gathering, I heard Vanessa speaking in a low voice. "We can't keep waiting forever." "What do you want me to do?" Ethan replied. "Convince her." My heart stopped. Convince me of what I stepped back before they could see me. I didn't hear the rest. But for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty that something was happening behind my back. Something involving me. Something involving my house. And whatever it was. Vanessa seemed determined to get what she wanted, no matter the cost. The conversation I overheard haunted me for weeks. "We can't keep waiting forever." Convince her. Those words echoed in my mind every time I looked at Ethan. Every time he smiled. Every time he told me everything was fine. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. I wanted to believe my son wasn't hiding something from me. But a mother's instincts are powerful, and mine were screaming that something was wrong. The trouble was, I didn't know what. A few months later, the first real clue appeared. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table sorting through mail when I noticed an envelope from my bank. Normally, I didn't pay much attention to those statements. My finances were simple. I lived modestly. My mortgage had been paid off years ago. I had a retirement account, some savings, and enough to live comfortably. Nothing extravagant, nothing complicated. But when I opened the statement, something immediately caught my attention. A transfer. Several $1,000s had been moved between accounts. I stared at the page. Then I checked the previous month's statement. Another transfer. Then another. My stomach tightened. I couldn't remember authorizing any of them. At first I thought maybe I was forgetting something. After all, I wasn't getting any younger. Perhaps I'd signed paperwork and simply didn't remember. The possibility frightened me, but it also didn't feel right. I've always been careful with money. Very careful. Years of raising Ethan alone had taught me that every dollar mattered. I wasn't the kind of person who forgot major financial decisions. That evening, I called Ethan. He answered after several rings. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded distracted. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure." I explained what I'd found. There was a brief pause. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, that..." The casualness in his tone immediately irritated me. What do you mean? Oh, that. Mom, remember those documents you signed a while back? I frowned. What documents? The financial authorization paperwork. My confusion deepened. What financial authorization paperwork? Another pause. Longer this time. Then he sighed. You signed it at my house last year. I searched my memory. Eventually, I remembered a stack of papers, a family gathering, Vanessa bringing forms into the dining room, Ethan explaining something about helping organize future estate planning. At the time, I hadn't thought much about it. I trusted my son. Why wouldn't I? You told me those papers were just routine planning documents. They are. Then why is money moving around? It's temporary. Temporary. The answer sounded rehearsed, like he'd prepared it in advance. For the first time in my life, I ended a conversation with Ethan feeling less reassured than before I called. Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention. Little things started standing out. Things I previously ignored. Things that suddenly seemed suspicious. One afternoon, I visited Ethan and Vanessa's house. Their neighborhood was one of the wealthiest in the area. Massive homes, luxury vehicles, perfect landscaping. Everything looked expensive, too expensive. Inside the house, the spending was even more obvious. Brand new furniture, custom renovations, high-end appliances, artwork that cost more than my first car. As I sat in their living room, I couldn't stop wondering how they were paying for it all. Real estate commissions could be lucrative. I knew that. But this felt excessive. When Ethan stepped out to answer a phone call, Vanessa sat across from me. She smiled politely. The same smile she always used. The smile that never reached her eyes. You seem worried lately, Bonnie. The comment caught me off guard. Do I? A little. I forced a smile. I'm fine. She leaned forward. Sometimes it's important to trust family. Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. It sounded less like reassurance, more like a warning. I changed the subject immediately, but the feeling lingered. A week later, another strange thing happened. I received a call from attorney Susan Miller. At first, I didn't recognize the name. Then I remembered. Susan had handled several legal matters for Richard and me years earlier. She was highly respected, meticulous, honest. The kind of lawyer you trusted completely. Mrs. Perkins, she said, I'd like to schedule a meeting with you. A meeting about what? There was hesitation. Something important. Her tone immediately got my attention. What kind of important? I'm afraid I'd prefer discussing it in person. My anxiety spiked. When can we meet? We'll find a time soon. Unfortunately, we never did. Every time I attempted to schedule something, complications appeared, unexpected cancellations. Conflicts, delays. Once Susan called to apologize, saying she had been informed I was unavailable. That surprised me. I had never canceled. Not once. The more it happened, the more suspicious I became. Eventually, I asked Ethan whether he knew anything about it. His reaction was immediate. Too immediate. Mom, why are you talking to lawyers? I blinked. Because Susan called me. His expression tightened. For a split second, I saw panic. Then it disappeared. Just as quickly as it had appeared. She's probably trying to sell legal services. I knew that wasn't true. Susan Miller wasn't that kind of lawyer. Still, I let the subject drop. At least outwardly. Inside, however, my concerns continued growing. Then came the moment that changed everything. The moment when suspicion became certainty. It happened late one evening. I was visiting unexpectedly again. Not because I was spying, because I wanted to bring Ethan a photo album I had found while cleaning. The front door wasn't completely closed when I arrived. As I stepped onto the porch, I heard raised voices inside. Ethan and Vanessa were arguing. Neither knew I was there. "We're running out of time," Vanessa said. "I know. You promised we'd have the money by now." I said, "I'm working on it." My pulse quickened. Money. Again. Then Vanessa said something that made my blood run cold. "If your mother doesn't cooperate, we're finished." Silence. Heavy silence. Then Ethan spoke. His voice sounded exhausted. Defeated. "I'll handle it." "You said that 3 months ago." "I'll handle it." I quietly stepped away from the door. My hands were trembling. For several minutes, I sat inside my car trying to process what I'd heard. What exactly was happening? Why did everything seem connected to me, to my house, to my finances, to my signature that night? I barely slept. The next morning, I started searching through old files, bank records, insurance papers, property documents, anything that might provide answers. Hours passed. Then I found something unusual, a copy of one of the documents Ethan had asked me to sign. As I read through it carefully, my stomach dropped. The language was far more complex than I remembered, far more significant. Several sections referenced financial authority, property management rights, account access, terms I never would have knowingly approved without legal advice. I immediately called Ethan. This time he didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. Then again. Still nothing. Later that evening, he finally returned the call. His voice sounded irritated. "What is it, Mom?" I held the document tightly. "What exactly did you have me sign?" Silence. Long silence. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan finally answered. And for the first time in his life, I heard something in his voice that terrified me. Not guilt, not shame, not regret. Fear. Real fear. Because whatever secret he had been hiding was getting dangerously close to being exposed. And neither Ethan nor Vanessa were prepared for me to discover the truth. The moment I heard fear in Ethan's voice, I knew the truth was closer than ever, but I still wasn't prepared for how quickly everything would collapse. For several days after our phone call, Ethan avoided me. My texts went unanswered. My calls went to voicemail. Whenever I reached out, there was always an excuse, a meeting, a client, a business trip, something, anything. The silence only confirmed what I already suspected. He was hiding something, and the more I uncovered, the more frightened he became. I decided it was time to stop waiting for answers. I would get them myself. The following Friday evening, I drove to Ethan and Vanessa's house. I called beforehand. No answer. I texted. No response. So I went anyway. The sky was dark when I arrived. Heavy clouds hung overhead. The air felt thick and uncomfortable, like a storm was coming. I remember standing outside their front door, taking a deep breath before ringing the bell. Vanessa answered. The look on her face told me immediately that my visit wasn't welcome. Bonnie, her voice was flat. Her voice was... Can I come in? She hesitated, then reluctantly stepped aside. The tension inside the house was impossible to ignore. Ethan was sitting in the living room, a laptop open in front of him. Several documents spread across the coffee table. The moment he saw me, his shoulders stiffened. We need to talk, I said. Neither of them responded. I sat down across from them. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then I pulled out the copies of the documents I had found. The room instantly changed. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Ethan looked away. Explain these. My voice was calm, far calmer than I actually felt. Ethan rubbed his forehead. Mom. No. I slid the papers toward him. Explain them. Another silence. Long. Painful. Finally, Ethan sighed. It's not what you think. I almost laughed. Those words, people only say them when it's exactly what you think. Then tell me what it is. He looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at him. Neither wanted to answer. That frightened me more than any explanation could have. Eventually, Ethan spoke. I've been handling some financial matters. What financial matters? Investments. The word landed heavily. Investments. I immediately remembered all the expensive purchases. The luxury house, the cars, the constant spending. What kind of investments? His jaw tightened. Real estate projects. I felt my stomach sink. How much money are we talking about? No answer. I repeated the question. This time Vanessa spoke. Enough that we need flexibility. Flexibility. Such a cold word. Such a dangerous word. How much? Still no answer. Then Ethan finally whispered the number. My heart nearly stopped. The debt was enormous. Far beyond what I had imagined. Far beyond anything responsible. I stared at him in disbelief. How could you borrow that much? We thought the projects would succeed. We, Vanessa immediately crossed her arms. We both made decisions. For the first time, she sounded defensive, not confident, not superior, defensive, because she knew the situation was becoming impossible to hide. I looked back at Ethan. Did you use my accounts? He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Did you? Some of the transfers were temporary. I felt physically sick. Temporary. Again. Always temporary. Always another excuse. Another justification. Another lie. How much of my money have you touched? His silence answered the question. I could barely breathe. The little savings I had built over decades. The money Richard and I had worked for. The security I depended on. They had treated it like a backup plan. A resource. A safety net. Not because they needed food. Not because they faced a medical emergency. because they wanted more. A bigger life, a richer life, a more impressive life. I suddenly felt exhausted, deeply exhausted, not physically, emotionally. Like years of trust were crumbling inside me. I want copies of everything, Vanessa immediately interrupted. That's unnecessary. I turned toward her. The look on my face must have shocked her because she stopped speaking. For years I had remained polite, patient, accommodating. That patience was finally gone. It is absolutely necessary. For the first time, nobody argued. I stood up. I'm leaving. Ethan followed me to the door. Outside, the first raindrops had begun to fall. Mom, I stopped walking. He sounded desperate. I can fix this. I turned around. The sadness on his face almost broke my heart. Almost. Because I still remembered the missing money. The lies. The documents. The secrecy. You should have told me the truth. His eyes filled with frustration. I was trying to protect you. No. My voice shook. You were protecting yourself. I left. But the confrontation didn't end there. It only made things worse. It made things. Over the next week, tension exploded between us. More documents surfaced. More inconsistencies appeared. Questions multiplied faster than answers. And every conversation became an argument. Then came the dinner that changed everything. The dinner I will never forget. The dinner that ended my life as I knew it. Ethan invited me over. He claimed he wanted to talk calmly, work things out, find a solution. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me still saw the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. So I went. The moment I entered the house, I knew something was wrong. The atmosphere felt hostile. Cold. Vanessa barely greeted me. Dinner was served in silence. Nobody seemed interested in eating. Everyone was waiting for something. Eventually, Ethan set down his fork. We need to settle this. My chest tightened. Settle what? The house. There it was, finally. The real issue, not investments. Not paperwork, not misunderstandings. The house, my house, the home Richard and I built together. The home where Ethan grew up. The home containing decades of memories. Vanessa leaned forward. You can't maintain it forever. I stared at her. Watch me. Her expression darkened. Ethan rubbed his temples. We need to sell it. Need, not want. Need. The desperation in his voice suddenly made sense. The debt. The pressure. The investments. Everything connected. The house was their escape plan, their solution, their rescue, and I was standing in the way. No. The word came out stronger than I expected. Ethan looked stunned. No. No. The room exploded. Years of frustration erupted all at once. Vanessa accused me of being selfish. I accused them of manipulation. Voices rose. Tempers flared. Then Ethan said something that shattered my heart. You've always made everything about yourself. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Myself, the woman who worked 2 jobs, the woman who sold her wedding ring, The woman who spent her entire life sacrificing for him. Myself, I stared at my son. The stranger sitting across from me, and realized I no longer recognized him. Then came the final blow. "If you won't help us," Ethan said, "then maybe it's time for you to leave." The room fell silent. I waited. Surely he didn't mean it. Surely this was anger talking. Surely he would take it back. He didn't. Instead, he stood up, walked to the hallway, grabbed my overnight bag, and threw it toward the front door. The sound echoed through the house. My heart broke with it. "Get out." I looked at him, waiting, praying, begging silently for him to stop, to apologize, to come back to himself. He never did. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky. Rain began pouring down. I slowly picked up my bag, my hands trembling, my vision blurred with tears. Then I walked toward the door. Not because I wanted to, because my own son had left me no choice. As I stepped into the storm, I heard the front door slam shut behind me. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt homeless. The rain hit my face so hard it felt like tiny needles. For several moments after Ethan slammed the door behind me, I simply stood there, motionless, numb. I couldn't seem to convince my body to move, and my son had just thrown me out of his life, not during an argument, not after a misunderstanding. He had physically put me outside and shut the door, like I was a stranger, like I meant nothing. The realization hurt more than the cold, more than the rain, more than the humiliation. I picked up my suitcase and slowly walked toward the street. The neighborhood was quiet. Most people were inside their warm homes, watching television, eating dinner, living normal lives. None of them knew that a 68-year-old woman was wandering through a storm with nowhere to go. I thought about calling someone, but who most of my closest friends had either moved away or passed on. My sister lived across the country in Arizona. I couldn't bring myself to call her. Not yet. I wasn't ready to say the words out loud. My son kicked me out. Even thinking it felt unreal. So I walked, one block, then another, and another. The rain soaked through my clothes completely. My shoes squished with every step. My hands shook from the cold. But inside, I barely noticed. The emotional pain drowned out everything else. I found myself wandering toward a small park not far from Ethan's neighborhood. There was a covered picnic shelter there, not much protection, but enough to escape the worst of the rain. I sat down on one of the benches and stared into the darkness. For the first time that night, I cried. Really cried. Not the quiet tears I had shed after Richard died. Not the private tears I had hidden from Ethan throughout the years. These were different, raw, broken. The tears of a mother whose heart had been shattered. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Time seemed meaningless. Eventually, my thoughts drifted backward, far backward, to another life, to another version of myself, and to a man I hadn't thought about in years, Harold Bennett. Even now, saying his name feels strange. Some people pass through your life briefly. Others leave footprints that never completely disappear. Harold was one of those people. I met him when I was 23 years old, long before I met Richard, long before Ethan was born, long before life became complicated. Back then, I was working at a local bookstore in Columbus. Harold was ambitious, funny, kind, the kind of man who could make an entire room laugh without even trying. We became close friends almost immediately. For several years, we spent countless afternoons together, coffee shops, baseball games, community events, long conversations about dreams and plans. Everyone assumed we would eventually become a couple, including my parents, including our friends, maybe even Harold himself. But life doesn't always follow the paths people expect. Before anything serious could happen between us, Richard entered my life. Richard was different, steady, dependable, quietly strong. I fell in love with him. Harold accepted it graciously. At least that's what I believed. He attended our wedding, shook Richard's hand, smiled for photographs. Then, gradually, he disappeared from my life. Years later, I heard rumors, stories, whispers. Someone claimed Harold had said cruel things about me after I married Richard. Someone else claimed he resented us. I never knew whether the stories were true, but they hurt. And eventually, without ever confronting him directly, I let the friendship die. Looking back now, I regret that, because I never actually heard those things from Harold himself. In sincerity, I simply believed what others told me. Then life moved on. Marriage, motherhood, widowhood, work, responsibility, survival. Decades passed, and Harold became little more than an old memory, a chapter that had quietly closed. Or so I thought. A sudden flash of headlights pulled me back to the present. A vehicle was approaching the shelter. At first, I paid little attention. Probably someone turning around, maybe a rideshare driver. But instead of continuing down the road, the vehicle slowed, then stopped, directly in front of the shelter. I blinked through the rain. The car was beautiful. A black Bentley, elegant, expensive, and completely out of place in the middle of a stormy night. For several seconds, nothing happened. The engine continued running. The headlights illuminated the rain. Then the driver's window slowly lowered. I couldn't see the person inside clearly. The interior was dark. But then I heard a voice. A familiar voice. A voice I hadn't heard in more than 40 years. Bonnie. My heart nearly stopped. For a moment I thought I was imagining things. Maybe exhaustion had finally caught up with me. Maybe grief was playing tricks on my mind. Then the voice came again. Softer this time. Bonnie Perkins, I stood up. My hands trembling. The driver opened the door and stepped out into the rain. Time seemed to freeze. He was older now, much older. Gray hair, weathered face, broader shoulders. But there was no mistaking him. Harold Bennett. My breath caught in my throat. Harold. He stared at me for a moment. The shock in his eyes mirrored my own. Then his expression changed. From surprise, to concern, to heartbreak. Because he could see exactly what condition I was in. The soaked clothes, the suitcase, the tears, the devastation. Without saying a word, he removed his coat and draped it around my shoulders. The gesture nearly broke me, not because of the coat, because it was the first act of kindness I had received all night. And after everything that had happened, I wasn't prepared for kindness. "Good Lord," Harold said quietly. "What happened to you?" The question opened something inside me. All the pain, all the humiliation, all the heartbreak. Suddenly it felt impossible to hold back. For a moment I couldn't speak. I simply looked away, trying to regain control. Harold didn't pressure me, didn't rush me, didn't demand answers. He simply stood beside me in the rain, waiting. Finally, I whispered the words. My son threw me out. The silence that followed felt enormous. Harold stared at me, certain he had misunderstood. "What?" I swallowed hard. "Ethan threw me out." Harold's face darkened. Not with pity. With disbelief, then anger, protective anger, the kind that appears when someone witnesses something deeply unfair. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The rain continued falling around us. Then Harold gently took my suitcase, opened the passenger door, and looked directly into my eyes. "Bonnie." There was warmth in his voice. Steadiness, safety. Something I hadn't felt all evening. "You're not spending another minute out here." I hesitated. Everything felt surreal. Felt the storm, the betrayal, this unexpected reunion. Seeing Harold again after all these years, it felt impossible. Like a dream, or perhaps a miracle. Harold offered a small smile, the same smile I remembered from decades ago. The same smile that had once made difficult days feel easier. "Come with me." For the first time since Ethan slammed the door, I felt something other than pain. A tiny spark. A fragile spark. Hope. And as I climbed into the Bentley beside the man I thought I had lost forever, I had no idea that the biggest revelations of my life were still waiting ahead. The inside of Harold Bennett's Bentley smelled faintly of leather and cedar. Warm air flowed through the vents, slowly thawing my frozen hands. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The windshield wipers swept rhythmically across the glass while rain hammered the roof above us. I stared out the window, watching blurred streetlights pass by. Everything felt unreal. A few hours earlier, I had been sitting in my son's dining room. Now I was riding through a storm with a man I hadn't seen in more than 4 decades. Life has a strange sense of timing. Eventually, Harold broke the silence. "Do you need a hospital?" I looked at him in surprise. "No." "You look exhausted." I managed a weak smile. "I think that's mostly emotional." His expression softened. "I imagine it is." The kindness in his voice nearly brought fresh tears to my eyes. For years I had grown accustomed to feeling like a burden around Ethan and Vanessa. Tonight, for the first time in a very long while, someone seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being. Not my money, not my house, not what I could provide. Me. That realization hurt more than I expected, because it reminded me of everything I had lost. 20 minutes later, Harold turned through a set of iron gates. My eyes widened, Beyond them sat an enormous estate surrounded by mature oak trees and beautifully maintained gardens. The house itself looked like something from a magazine. Elegant, but not flashy. Large without feeling excessive. Warm lights glowed through the windows. For a moment, I simply stared. "You live here?" Harold chuckled. "I do." I shook my head. "You did pretty well for yourself." A shadow crossed his face. "Eventually." There was something in his tone that suggested a much longer story, one he wasn't ready to tell. At least not yet. A housekeeper greeted us when we entered. Harold immediately asked her to prepare a guest room. Then he turned toward me. "First things first." I frowned. "What? Dry clothes?" For the first time all night, I laughed. A small laugh, but genuine. "I suppose you're right." Within an hour, I'd showered, changed into comfortable clothes, and eaten a warm bowl of soup. The simple kindness nearly overwhelmed me. I couldn't remember the last time someone had taken care of me. For decades, I had been the caretaker, the provider, the helper. Now suddenly the roles had reversed. Later that evening, Harold and I sat in a spacious living room overlooking the rain-soaked garden. A fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace. The room felt peaceful, safe. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Harold looked at me carefully. "Tell me everything." And somehow I did. I told him about Richard, about Ethan, about the sacrifices, the documents, the missing money, the debt, the arguments, the house, and finally the moment Ethan threw me out. Harold listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. When I finished, the room fell silent. He stared into the fire for several moments. Then he shook his head slowly. "I can't believe he did that." Neither could I. Not completely. Part of me still hoped I would wake up and discover it had all been a nightmare. Unfortunately, reality doesn't work that way. Eventually, I asked the question that had been lingering in my mind since the moment I saw him. "What about you?" Harold smiled faintly. "What about me?" 40 years is a long time," he laughed softly. "It certainly is." Then he leaned back in his chair, and for the next hour, he told me his story. After we lost contact, Harold had moved to Chicago. He started a small transportation company with a single truck and a mountain of debt. The first few years were brutal. There were months when he barely survived financially. Months when he slept in his office. Months when failure seemed inevitable. But he refused to quit. Gradually, the company expanded. One truck became 3, 3 became 10. 10 became 50. Over time, his small business evolved into one of the largest regional logistics companies in the Midwest. The success hadn't come quickly or easily, but it had come. As I listened, I couldn't help feeling proud of him. Not because of the money, because of the perseverance, the determination, the resilience, the same qualities I remembered from our younger years. Eventually, the conversation drifted toward a subject neither of us had addressed. Our past. The friendship that disappeared. The decades of silence. I hesitated before speaking. "Harold," Yes. Did you ever say those things about me? His forehead furrowed. What things? The things people claimed you said after I married Richard? For several seconds, he simply stared at me. Then genuine confusion crossed his face. Bonnie, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. I blinked. What? He shook his head. I never said anything negative about you. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. But I was told. By who? The question stopped me. Because suddenly I couldn't remember. Not specifically. The rumors had traveled through multiple people, friends of friends, conversations, assumptions. Years had blurred the details. Harold sighed. Bonnie, I was disappointed when you married Richard. His honesty surprised me. But I respected your decision. I didn't speak. He looked into the fire. I cared about you. There was no bitterness in his voice, no accusation. Just truth, simple truth. I always wanted you to be happy. Emotion tightened my throat. 40 years of believing something that might never have been true. 40 years of a friendship lost because neither of us had confronted the misunderstanding directly. The realization was heartbreaking and strangely beautiful at the same time. Because for the first time, the wound could finally heal. We talked late into the night about old memories, mutual friends, funny moments from our youth. Stories we hadn't shared in decades. For brief stretches, it almost felt like no time had passed at all. Then something unexpected happened. Harold became serious, very serious. There's something else you should know. His tone immediately got my attention. What is it? He hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then he spoke. I know more about Ethan's situation than you think. I stared at him. What do you mean? Harold folded his hands together. I've been aware of some of his financial problems for a while. My heart skipped. How? He exhaled slowly. Because one of my companies almost became involved in one of his real estate projects, I felt my pulse quicken. Suddenly, the room seemed smaller, more tense, more dangerous, Harold continued carefully. That's how I first learned he was struggling. I leaned forward. How long have you known? About a year. A year. The number stunned me. An entire year. Harold watched my reaction. Then he added something even more shocking. And that's not the only reason I know what's happening. My stomach tightened. What aren't you telling me? For the first time all evening, genuine concern appeared in his eyes. The kind of concern someone shows before delivering bad news. Bonnie, he said quietly. I think Ethan and Vanessa are hiding far more than debt. The room suddenly felt cold despite the fire. I stared at him, unable to speak. Because deep down, I already feared he was right, and whatever secret was still buried beneath all the lies was likely far worse than anything I had discovered so far. I barely slept that night. After Harold told me he believed Ethan and Vanessa were hiding more than debt, my mind refused to rest. Every possibility felt worse than the last. What else could there be? More missing money fraud forgery. I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling long after midnight. Outside, the storm had finally passed. Inside, another storm was just beginning. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a brief moment, I forgot everything. Then reality returned. Ethan, the house, the betrayal, the questions, so many questions. I dressed and went downstairs. Harold was already seated at the kitchen table reading financial reports. He looked up and smiled. "Morning?" "Morning." I sat across from him. The warmth in the room felt comforting. Safe. Something I desperately needed. A cup of coffee appeared in front of me. I wrapped my hands around it. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "What exactly do you think Ethan is hiding?" Harold set down his papers. His expression became serious. "I don't know for certain." "Then why say that?" He leaned back. "Because the numbers don't make sense." "What numbers?" "The debt." I frowned. He continued. "I've spent 40 years evaluating businesses and investments." I nodded. "People make bad decisions all the time. That's normal." He paused. "But Ethan's situation isn't normal." That got my attention. Harold opened a folder. Inside were several pages of public business records, documents, property filings, investment registrations, things I didn't fully understand. He slid them toward me. Ethan was involved in 3 major development projects. I looked down. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dollars, far beyond anything I imagined. "How?" Harold sighed. "Leverage." I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means borrowing money to make bigger investments." My stomach tightened. "Isn't that common?" "To a point." He tapped one of the pages. "This isn't a point." His voice hardened. "This is recklessness." The room grew quiet. Harold pointed to another document. "What worries me isn't the debt itself." "What is it?" "The timeline." I looked at him. "The timing doesn't match." I frowned. "I don't understand." He folded his hands. "Based on these records, Ethan started having financial problems nearly 2 years ago." 2 years. The number stunned me. Because 2 years ago was when many of the strange behaviors had begun. The secrecy, the paperwork, the pressure, the arguments. Everything suddenly lined up. Harold watched my reaction. Then he said something unexpected. "I think someone else knows exactly what's happening." "Who?" "Attorney Susan Miller." The name immediately got my attention. Richard's lawyer, the woman who kept trying to contact me, the woman I never managed to meet. A chill ran through me. "You think she knows something?" "I think she knows a lot." Before I could respond, Harold's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Then his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Interesting." "What?" "It's Susan." My heart skipped. "You're kidding." He shook his head. "No," he answered immediately. I watched his face carefully as he listened. Within seconds, his expression changed. Concern, surprise, then relief. Finally, he hung up. "What happened?" Harold smiled. I think we're about to get some answers. 2 hours later, Susan Miller arrived. She was older than I remembered. Silver hair, sharp eyes, professional as ever. The moment she saw me, she looked relieved. Gosh, Bonnie. She hugged me tightly. Whoa, I've been trying to reach you for months. Months! The word hit me hard. Why? Susan exchanged a glance with Harold. Then she sat down. What followed would change everything. She opened a thick legal file. Inside were dozens of documents, property records, trust agreements, estate paperwork. Some carried Richard's signature. My pulse accelerated. Richard, even after all these years, seeing his signature affected me. Susan carefully organized the documents. Then she looked directly at me. Bonnie, before Richard died, he made several changes to your estate plan. I blinked. What changes? She pulled out a document. Richard was worried. Worried about what? The future. I felt emotion tightening my throat. That sounded exactly like Richard. Always thinking ahead. Always protecting his family. Susan continued. He wanted to make sure you were safe no matter what happened. I stared at the papers. What does that have to do with Ethan? Susan took a deep breath. Everything. The room suddenly felt smaller, more intense, more important. She pointed to one page. This house. I immediately recognized the address. My house. The home Richard and I had built together. The home Ethan desperately wanted to sell. Susan tapped the document. Richard created a protective ownership structure. I frowned. A what? It means the property can't be sold without your direct authorization. I blinked, then blinked again. Surely I had misunderstood. What? Susan nodded. The house cannot legally be sold without your consent? For several seconds I couldn't speak. I simply stared, trying to process the information. But Ethan said, I know what Ethan said. Susan's tone sharpened. He was wrong. My heart began pounding. You're absolutely certain. 100%. Relief washed through me so suddenly that I almost cried. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something powerful. Hope. Real hope. Not because of the house itself, but because it meant Ethan hadn't won. The home Richard built wasn't gone. Not yet. Susan pulled out another document. There's more. Of course there was. There always was. She continued. The trust structure names you as the final decision maker. I stared. The final decision maker, yes. Susan smiled slightly. No sale. No transfer. No refinancing. No major property action. Without you, I felt dizzy. Months of fear and months of confusion. Months of manipulation. And the entire time, I still held the legal authority. Ethan didn't. Vanessa didn't. I did. Harold looked pleased. Susan looked relieved. I looked stunned. Then another realization hit me. A troubling one. If that's true... Susan nodded slowly. She already knew what I was about to ask. Then Ethan knows it too. Silence filled the room. Because we all understood what that meant. Ethan wasn't trying to find me because he loved me. He wasn't trying to repair our relationship. He wasn't trying to make things right. He needed something. My signature. My approval. My cooperation. Without it, his entire plan collapsed. The realization hurt, more than I wanted to admit. Even now, part of me still wanted to believe there was goodness left in my son. Part of me still wanted to believe he cared, but the facts were becoming harder to ignore. Susan carefully closed the file. Then she looked directly at me. "Bonnie, I need to ask you something." "What?" "Have Ethan or Vanessa contacted you since the night you left?" I shook my head. "No." Susan exchanged another glance with Harold. Then she sighed. "I don't think that's going to last much longer." A knot formed in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Susan's expression turned grim. "Because based on what I'm seeing, She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They're running out of options." The room fell silent. And for the first time, I realized something important. The next move wasn't theirs. It was mine. For the first time since Ethan threw me out, I felt something dangerous. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. The fog that had surrounded my life for the past 2 years was finally beginning to lift. Every lie, every manipulation, every strange conversation, every missing dollar. The pieces were slowly falling into place. And the picture they formed was uglier than I had imagined. 3 days passed after my meeting with Susan Miller. 3 quiet days. 3 days during which neither Ethan nor Vanessa contacted me. At first, I thought perhaps they still didn't know where I was. Then Susan called. Her voice sounded tense. "Bonnie, we have a problem." My stomach tightened instantly. "What happened?" "The house." I gripped the phone. "What about it?" "There was an attempted sale filing this morning." I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" Susan sighed heavily. "They tried to move forward anyway." I sat down immediately. The room suddenly felt smaller. "How?" "They submitted preliminary paperwork." "Without my signature?" "Yes." My pulse accelerated. "Is that legal?" "No." The answer came immediately. Firm. Certain. "No, it is not." For several moments, I simply stared at the wall. I wanted to be shocked, but I wasn't, not anymore. The Ethan I raised would never have considered such a thing. The man he had become apparently would. Susan continued. The filing was rejected. Relief washed through me. Thank God. But that's not the important part. A chill ran through me. What is... They seemed desperate. The word hung in the air. Desperate. Not frustrated. Not disappointed. Desperate. And desperate people make dangerous decisions. After ending the call, I found Harold in his study. He listened carefully as I explained everything. When I finished, he remained silent for several seconds. Then he nodded. "They're out of options." The certainty in his voice startled me. "How can you be sure?" "Because people don't attempt illegal shortcuts when they have alternatives." I hated how logical that sounded. Deep down, I knew he was right. That afternoon, Harold received information from one of his business contacts. The news wasn't good. Apparently, One of Ethan's major real estate projects had completely collapsed. Investors were demanding answers. Creditors were demanding payment. Lenders were growing impatient. The financial pressure was becoming unbearable. The more we learned, the more obvious the truth became. Ethan wasn't chasing the house because he wanted a better future. He was chasing it because he needed a rescue. And he needed it immediately. The following morning, everything changed. I was sitting on Harold's back patio drinking coffee when my phone rang. The screen displayed a name I hadn't seen in nearly a week. Ethan. My heart immediately began racing. For several seconds, I simply stared at the phone. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted answers. Eventually, I answered. Hello? Silence. Then Ethan spoke. His voice sounded different, fragile, exhausted. Mom. I closed my eyes. Hearing him call me that still hurt. Yes. I've been trying to reach you. That was a lie. A blatant lie. And we both knew it. Still. I didn't challenge him. What do you want, Ethan? The silence that followed felt uncomfortable. Then he sighed. I want to see you. I immediately thought of Susan's warning. Desperate, running out of options. Need, not love. Need. Why? Because you're my mother. The answer arrived too quickly. Too smoothly. Too perfectly. Like a rehearsed line, I remained silent. Finally, Ethan spoke again. Ina, can we just talk? Against my better judgment, I agreed. We arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway across town. Public, neutral, safe. The next afternoon, I arrived early. My hands were shaking. Not because I feared Ethan. Because I feared disappointment. No matter what happened, he was still my son. And some part of me desperately wanted to see the little boy I once knew. 20 minutes later, he walked through the door. I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath his eyes, wrinkled clothes, unshaven face. For the first time in years, he looked vulnerable, almost broken. When he sat down across from me, neither of us spoke immediately. The silence felt heavy. Finally, Ethan looked up. I'm sorry. There it was. The apology I'd imagined hearing 1,000 times. The apology I thought would bring relief. Instead, it brought confusion. Because something felt wrong. Very wrong. I studied his face carefully. The words sounded right, but the emotion behind them didn't. It felt forced, manufactured. Like a performance. What exactly are you sorry for? His eyes flickered. The reaction lasted less than a second. But I noticed it. Because mothers notice everything. I handled things badly, not specific, not sincere, and not enough. I remained silent. He continued. I've been under a lot of pressure. Pressure. Again. Always pressure. Always excuses. Never responsibility. I waited, hoping he would continue. Eventually, he did. Vanessa and I made mistakes. Closer, but still not there. Still avoiding the truth. Then he leaned forward. Mom, I need your help. There it was, finally. The real reason. Not love, not regret, not reconciliation. Help. I felt something inside me break. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly. The final piece of hope I had been protecting. I looked away, unable to hide my disappointment. Ethan immediately continued. The house situation is complicated. Of course it was. The house, always the house. Never me. Never us, so the house. I stared out the cafe window. People walked by carrying shopping bags, laughing, living ordinary lives. Meanwhile, my own son sat across from me trying to manipulate me. Again. Then something unexpected happened. A phone rang. Ethan's phone. He looked down. His face immediately changed. Panic. Just real panic. Before he could silence it, I saw the caller ID, Vanessa. He rejected the call. Seconds later, it rang again. Then again. Then again. I watched carefully. The tension in his face told me everything. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Finally, he stood. I need to take this. He stepped outside. I remained seated. Part of me wanted to leave. Another part wanted answers, so. Then fate intervened. The cafe window had been left slightly open. Not enough for conversation. But Ethan wasn't speaking normally. He was shouting, and every word drifted inside. You said we'd have more time. Silence. Then again. I can't get her signature if she doesn't trust me. My heart stopped. Signature. There it was. The truth. Raw. Unfiltered. No performance. No fake tears. No rehearsed apologies. Just truth. He wasn't trying to rebuild our relationship. He wasn't trying to make amends. He wanted my signature. Nothing more. My chest tightened painfully. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Years of sacrifice, years of love, and years of devotion. And somehow our relationship had been reduced to a document. A signature. A transaction. Ethan returned several minutes later. His face pale. His smile forced. But something had changed. Because now I knew, really knew. And once truth reveals itself, it can never be hidden again. I looked directly into his eyes. For the first time since arriving, I felt completely calm, completely certain, completely awake. And as Ethan sat down and prepared to continue his performance, he had no idea that I had just heard everything. When Ethan sat back down at the cafe table, he had no idea that everything had changed. A few minutes earlier, I had still been willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Now I wasn't. I had heard the truth with my own ears, not a version of the truth, not a carefully edited explanation. The truth. I can't get her signature if she doesn't trust me. Those words kept echoing in my head. The worst part wasn't the manipulation. It wasn't even the lies. It was realizing that he knew exactly how badly he had hurt me and still viewed me as an obstacle rather than a mother. Ethan forced a smile. You okay, Mom? The question almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. A week earlier, he had thrown me into the rain. Now he was asking if I was okay. I looked directly at him. For a brief second, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Good. For once, he wasn't completely in control. I'm fine. The answer seemed to relax him. He leaned forward. Mom, I know things have been difficult. Difficult. Such a harmless word for such devastating actions. I folded my hands quietly, listening, waiting, watching. I know I made mistakes. There it was again. Mistakes. Not betrayal, not deception, not theft. Mistakes. Every word sounded carefully selected. Like something practiced in front of a mirror. I've been under incredible pressure. I remained silent. The investments went bad. Still silent. Vanessa and I are trying to fix everything. Still silent. The silence seemed to make him uncomfortable. Good. For years I had been the uncomfortable one. The confused one. The manipulated one. Now it was his turn. Finally he sighed. Mom, why won't you say anything? I looked directly into his eyes and... Because I'm waiting. Waiting for what? The truth? The color drained slightly from his face. Not much. But enough. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then Ethan looked away. The conversation wasn't going according to his plan, and I could see it. He had expected tears. Forgiveness. Guilt. Emotion. What he got instead was calm. And calm frightened people who relied on manipulation. Eventually he tried another approach. His voice softened. Do you remember when Dad died? The question caught me off guard. Of course I remembered. I remembered every detail, every second, every unbearable moment. Ethan continued. You carried everything. I said nothing. You sacrificed your entire life for me. A lump formed in my throat despite myself. Because that part was true, painfully true. He leaned forward again. And now I need you one more time. There it was. Again, need, not love, need. The conversation had finally reached its destination. I stared at him. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him, because the desperation in his eyes was real. The debt was real. The fear was real, but so was the damage he had caused. So this is about the house. His face tightened. The pause was answer enough. Mom. So it is, he exhaled heavily. Partly, I nearly laughed. Partly, what a ridiculous word. How much debt are you actually in? Ethan. His eyes widened. The question clearly surprised him. Who told you about that? I didn't answer. Harold, interesting. Not denial, so not confusion. Immediate concern about Harold. That told me more than he intended. How much? Another long silence. Then he gave me a number. The figure was even worse than I expected. Far worse. I felt my stomach twist. No wonder he was desperate. No wonder Vanessa kept calling. No wonder they were trying to sell the house. The amount could destroy lives, careers, marriages, entire futures. For a brief moment, I saw the little boy I used to know, the frightened child who came running to me after nightmares. The boy who trusted me to fix everything. The boy who believed his mother could make bad things disappear. And suddenly I understood. Part of Ethan still believed that, even now, even after all these years, he still expected me to save him. The way I always had, the way I always would. The problem was that something inside me had changed. The night he threw me out had changed it. The lies had changed it. The betrayal had changed it. I still loved him. That would never disappear. But love and obedience are not the same thing. A mother can love her child deeply while refusing to enable destruction. Ethan. My voice was calm. Steady. Firm. I will not sign anything. The words hit him like a punch. For several seconds he simply stared. What? I said no. His face paled. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Mom, no. For the first time in years, I interrupted him. His expression revealed genuine shock. Apparently, he wasn't used to that. I understand exactly what's happening. His breathing became heavier. You'd rather see me lose everything. The question hurt. Because it was designed to hurt. Designed to make me feel responsible. Designed to trigger guilt. For decades, that tactic would have worked. Not anymore. You lost everything the night you chose greed over family. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Ethan looked wounded, actually wounded, and for a brief second, I wondered if perhaps they had finally reached him. Then his expression hardened. The vulnerability disappeared. The performance ended, and the real Ethan emerged. This isn't just my fault. There he was. The blame, the excuses, the refusal to take responsibility. I never said it was. You don't know what Vanessa pressured me into. I blinked. Interesting, very interesting. Because that was the first time he had openly shifted blame toward his wife. Cracks were forming. The partnership between them wasn't as strong as before. I made a mental note of it. Then I stood. The conversation was over. Ethan looked alarmed. Where are you going? Home. The word surprised both of us. Because for the first time in days, I actually had somewhere that felt like home. Somewhere safe, somewhere peaceful, somewhere filled with kindness instead of manipulation. Harold's house. As I reached for my purse, Ethan stood as well. Panic flashed across his face. Please. The single word stopped me. I turned slowly. For a moment, he looked exactly like the little boy I remembered. Lost. Afraid. Desperate. But then I remembered the rain, the suitcase, the slammed door, the lies, the forged paperwork, the missing money, the phone call, the signature. And reality returned. If you truly want to fix this, I said quietly, everything goes through attorney Susan Miller from now on. His eyes widened. The reaction was immediate, raw, fear, real fear, not because of me, because of Susan, because lawyers deal in facts, evidence, truth, and truth was the one thing Ethan had spent 2 years avoiding. I started walking toward the exit. Then a familiar voice came from behind me. Bonnie. I turned. Standing near the entrance was Harold Bennett. He had arrived quietly sometime during the meeting. His posture was relaxed, his expression calm, but the protective look in his eyes said everything. Ethan stared at him. then at me, then back at Harold. And suddenly realization dawned on his face. For the first time, he understood something important. I was no longer alone. And that changed everything. The moment Ethan saw Harold standing near the cafe entrance, something shifted. Not in me, in him. His entire posture changed, his shoulders stiffened, his expression tightened, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine uncertainty in his eyes. Harold wasn't emotional. He wasn't angry. He wasn't dramatic. He simply walked toward our table with the calm confidence of a man who had spent his entire life dealing with difficult situations. "Good afternoon, Ethan." His voice was polite, professional, controlled. Ethan nodded. "Harold." The tension between them was impossible to miss. Harold pulled out a chair. "Mind if I sit down?" Neither of us answered. He sat anyway. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Harold looked directly at Ethan. "I think this conversation has gone on long enough." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the truth should finally come out." The color drained from Ethan's face, not completely, but enough. Enough for me to notice. Enough for Harold to notice. Enough for everyone. I looked back and forth between them, my heart pounding, because I suddenly realized something. Harold hadn't come here by accident. He knew something. Something important. Something significant. Something Ethan desperately didn't want revealed. Ethan forced a laugh. "I don't know what you're talking about." Harold didn't react. Instead, he reached into a leather portfolio he had brought with him. Then he placed several documents on the table. The moment Ethan saw them, his expression changed completely. Panic. Raw panic. My stomach tightened. "What are those?" Harold looked at me. "Evidence." The single word sent a chill through my body. Evidence. Not assumptions. Not theories, not evidence. Ethan immediately stood. "This is ridiculous." Harold remained calm. "Sit down." The authority in his voice surprised even me. For a moment, Ethan looked like he might leave. Then he slowly sat again. Because deep down, he already knew he couldn't run forever. Harold slid one document toward me. I looked down. Bank statements. My bank statements. Rows of transactions highlighted in yellow. Withdrawals. Transfers. Account activity. Amounts I didn't recognize. Amounts I had never approved. My hands started trembling. "What am I looking at?" Harold pointed to several entries. "Money moved from your accounts into holding companies connected to Ethan's investments." Ooh. I stared. Unable to speak. Unable to breathe. Unable to process what I was seeing. Because there it was. In black and white, the proof, not rumors, not suspicions, proof. I slowly looked at Ethan. He couldn't meet my eyes. The sight hurt more than I expected. Because guilty people avoid eye contact. And my son looked very guilty. Harold continued. "At first I thought this might be negligence." My heart sank. Then he placed another document on the table. "But it wasn't." I looked down. Corporate filings, ownership records, financial disclosures, complex legal paperwork. Most of it meant very little to me. But Harold clearly understood every page, and he tapped one section. This company. I looked. The name meant nothing. What about it? It received money from Bonnie's accounts. I frowned, and Harold looked at Ethan. Then back at me. Ethan controlled it. The room seemed to tilt. For several seconds, I couldn't hear anything. The sounds of the cafe faded. The voices around us disappeared. Everything narrowed to a single terrifying realization. My son had knowingly moved my money. Not accidentally, not mistakenly, knowingly. The betrayal struck me like a physical blow. I looked at Ethan. Still no eye contact. Still no denial. Still no explanation. Just silence. Painful silence. Then another voice interrupted. That's only part of it. I turned. Susan Miller was standing beside the table. I hadn't even seen her enter. My pulse accelerated. Apparently, Harold had invited her. And judging by the expression on her face, she hadn't come empty-handed. Susan sat down beside me, then placed an even thicker file on the table. Ethan. Her voice was calm, professional, dangerous, the kind of voice attorneys use when they already know the truth. We need to discuss several matters. Ethan swallowed visibly. Nobody spoke. Susan opened the file. Inside were dozens of documents, property records, financial authorizations, trust documents, correspondence, years of paperwork, evidence, lots of evidence. She carefully organized everything. Then she began. Over the last 18 months, multiple actions were taken involving Bonnie's financial assets. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. Several of those actions occurred without informed consent. I closed my eyes briefly. Informed consent. Such a polite legal phrase. Such an ugly reality, Susan continued. Additionally, multiple representations made to Bonnie regarding ownership rights were inaccurate. Inaccurate, another polite word. A lawyer's version of lying. Ethan finally spoke. You make it sound worse than it is. Susan immediately turned toward him. No? Her voice remained calm. If anything, I'm being generous. The silence that followed felt enormous. I looked at Ethan. Waiting, praying, hoping for something, an explanation, a confession, an apology, anything. Instead, Vanessa arrived. The timing couldn't have been worse. Or perhaps it was perfect. She stormed into the cafe looking furious. The moment she saw the document spread across the table, her face turned white, not angry, scared, very scared. She marched directly toward us. Ethan! Her voice was sharp. What is this? Nobody answered. Then she noticed Susan. Then Harold. Then me. And suddenly she understood. The game was over. For years she had controlled every conversation, every narrative, every explanation. Now facts were sitting on the table. Facts don't care about manipulation. Facts don't care about charm. Facts don't care about excuses. Vanessa looked at Ethan. You told me this was handled. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The moment she realized what she'd said, it was too late. Everyone heard it. especially Susan. Susan's eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting. Very interesting. Harold noticed it too. Vanessa immediately tried to recover, but the damage was done. Cracks were appearing, and once cracks begin, collapse usually follows. Susan calmly pulled out another document. This is where things become especially concerning. My stomach tightened again. How could this possibly get worse? Susan answered that question immediately. The signatures. I froze. What about them? She slid several pages toward me. I examined them carefully. My signature appeared on every page. At least it looked like my signature. But something felt wrong. Very wrong. Susan pointed to specific areas. Look closely. I did. Then I saw it. Tiny differences. Subtle inconsistencies. Small details I would never have noticed on my own. My heart stopped. No? Susan nodded. Yeah. I looked at her, then at Ethan, then at Vanessa, then back at the documents. My entire body felt numb. Because the implication was horrifying. So, some of those signatures weren't mine. Someone had altered documents. Someone had created authorizations I never approved. Someone had crossed a line far beyond manipulation, far beyond dishonesty, far beyond family conflict. This was something else entirely. Something serious, something potentially criminal. Tears filled my eyes. Not because of the money. Not because of the house. Because I suddenly understood the depth of the betrayal. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was deception. Calculated deception. And the people responsible were sitting directly across from me, for the first time all afternoon. Ethan finally looked at me, really looked at me. The guilt in his eyes was unmistakable. The shame, the fear, the regret, it was all there. And in that moment, I knew. The full truth was finally beginning to emerge. But even now, I still hadn't heard the worst part. I sat in stunned silence after Susan revealed the questionable signatures. The cafe around us continued moving as if nothing extraordinary had happened. People laughed, coffee machines hissed, dishes clattered, normal life carried on. Meanwhile, my entire world was unraveling. I looked at the documents again, then at Ethan, then at Vanessa. For years, I had trusted them completely, and now I couldn't even trust a signature bearing my own name. The realization was devastating. Susan closed one folder and opened another. The sound seemed unnaturally loud. Almost like the final chapter of a long deception being opened for public inspection. "Ethan," she said calmly, "before we continue, I want to be clear about something." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Susan's eyes remained fixed on him. "This situation has reached a point where honesty is your best option." Ethan looked exhausted, defeated, cornered. But he still wasn't ready to surrender. "I never intended to hurt my mother." The statement hung in the air. I wanted to believe it. God help me, I truly did, because despite everything, he was still my son. But intentions matter less than actions. And his actions had already left scars. Susan nodded slowly. Perhaps. Then she pushed another document across the table. What about this? Ethan looked down. The moment he saw the page, his face turned pale. My stomach tightened. What is it? Harold answered quietly. A loan guarantee. I frowned. A what? Susan explained. One of Ethan's development projects required additional financing. I listened carefully. He needed collateral. The word immediately caught my attention. Collateral. Security. Something valuable pledged against debt. Then realization hit me. The house. My house. Richard's house. Our family home. My heart began racing. Susan continued. He attempted to present the property as a guaranteed asset. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. What does that mean? It means lenders were led to believe the property would eventually become available. I stared at Ethan. My own son. The boy I had raised. The child I once carried in my arms. And suddenly I realized how far things had gone. This wasn't simply debt. This wasn't just bad decisions. He had built future financial plans around assets that weren't his to promise. Harold leaned forward. The lenders expected access to the property's value. I closed my eyes. Everything made sense now. The pressure, the urgency, the desperation. The house wasn't just important, it was essential. Without it, the entire financial structure collapsed. Vanessa suddenly spoke. That's not fair. Everyone looked at her. She pointed toward Ethan. He was trying to save everything. Susan's expression hardened. By using Bonnie's assets without proper authority, Vanessa fell silent. For the first time since I'd met her, she seemed genuinely shaken. Not angry, not manipulative. Scared, very scared. The confidence she always carried had vanished, and that told me something important. The situation was even worse than they had admitted. Harold looked toward Ethan. How much are the creditors demanding? Ethan didn't answer. Harold repeated the question. Still silence. Then Susan quietly named the figure. The number nearly made me gasp. It was catastrophic. Far larger than anything Ethan had previously admitted. For a moment I thought I might faint. Years of debt, failed investments, accumulated obligations. Everything had snowballed into a disaster. No wonder they were desperate. No wonder they wanted the house. No wonder they had been willing to destroy our relationship. Then something unexpected happened. Vanessa suddenly stood. Abruptly, violently, her chair nearly tipped over. This isn't all our fault. The words exploded out of her. The entire cafe seemed to pause. Even nearby customers glanced in our direction. Vanessa pointed directly at Ethan. I told you to stop over a year ago. The room went silent. Ethan looked stunned. Vanessa, no. Her voice cracked. Months of pressure. Years of stress. Everything was pouring out. You kept borrowing. His face darkened. You agreed. I agreed in the beginning. She was crying now. Actual tears, not the calculated emotions I'd seen before of Nate. These looked real, raw, messy, human. Then she said something none of us expected. I wanted the lifestyle, yeah. The confession hung in the air, painful, honest, brutal. I wanted the bigger house, more tears. The cars, another breath. The vacations. She shook her head. But I never thought it would go this far. For the first time, nobody interrupted. Because truth had finally arrived. Not polished, not rehearsed. Truth. Ugly truth. Ethan looked away, unable to face anyone, unable to defend himself, unable to argue. Because deep down, he knew she wasn't entirely wrong. Then came the final blow. Vanessa wiped her eyes, looked directly at him, and said the words that changed everything. "I'm done." Ethan blinked. "What?" "I'm done." The silence felt endless. Vanessa grabbed her purse. "You said every project would fix the last one." Nobody spoke. "You said every loan was temporary." Still silence. "You said every risk would pay off." Her voice broke. "And now everything is gone." Then she looked at me. For a brief moment, genuine shame appeared on her face. "I'm sorry, Bonnie." The apology sounded sincere. Surprisingly sincere. Not enough to erase years of damage. But sincere. Then she turned and walked away. Just like that. No dramatic speech, no final argument, no goodbye. She simply left. The cafe door closed behind her, and she never looked back. For several moments, nobody moved. Ethan stared at the entrance, frozen, disbelieving, abandoned. The irony wasn't lost on me. A week earlier, he had abandoned me. Now he was experiencing a small piece of that same pain. Not equal pain, not even close, but enough to leave a mark. Finally, Ethan sat down again. Slowly, like a man carrying the weight of the world. The fight had gone out of him. Completely. For the first time since this nightmare began. I wasn't looking at an arrogant son, or a manipulative businessman, or a desperate debtor. I was looking at a broken man. A man who had lost control of his life. Harold remained calm. Susan remained professional. I remained silent. Then Ethan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What happens now?" No one answered immediately, because the question carried enormous weight. Legal consequences, financial consequences, personal consequences, family consequences. Everything was changing. Finally, Susan spoke. "The illegal filings are already dead." Ethan nodded weakly. "The lenders will pursue repayment." Another nod. "The trust remains under Bonnie's control." His shoulders sagged. And Susan looked directly at him. "And what happens next depends largely on your mother." The room fell silent again. Everyone looked at me. Harold, Susan, Ethan. Even nearby customers seemed strangely distant. Because suddenly I understood something. For the first time in years, I held the power. Not power for revenge. Not power for punishment. Power to choose. Power to decide. Power to determine what kind of woman I wanted to be. And as I looked at my son sitting across from me, broken and frightened, I realized the hardest decision of my life was still ahead. The drive back to Harold's estate was quiet. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. The kind of silence that follows life-changing revelations. I sat beside Harold, looking out the window as the city passed by. My mind replayed everything that had happened at the cafe. Vanessa leaving. The forged signatures, the hidden debt, the failed investments, the lies, so many lies. Yet strangely, the thing that hurt most wasn't the money. It wasn't the legal problems. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, Ethan had become a man I no longer recognized. And I didn't know when it happened, or how. At night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Not the man sitting in the cafe. The little boy. The child who used to leave hand-drawn Mother's Day cards on my pillow. The boy who cried when his goldfish died. The teenager who hugged me after every baseball game. Where had that person gone? Had he disappeared completely, or was he buried beneath years of greed, fear, and bad decisions the next morning? Susan called. Her tone was calmer than usual. "Bonnie, I have some updates." I sat down immediately. "What kind of updates?" "Ethan contacted me." That surprised me. "What did he want?" He asked for legal representation recommendations. I blinked. That wasn't what I expected. Not at all. Susan seemed to sense my confusion. "He's finally accepting reality." For several seconds, I didn't speak. Because deep down, that was what I had wanted all along. Not punishment. Responsibility. There is a difference. A huge difference. Eventually, I asked the question that had been bothering me. "Is he in legal trouble?" Susan paused. Then answered honestly. "Potentially." My stomach tightened. She continued carefully. "At this stage, most parties seem interested in recovering money rather than pursuing criminal action." I exhaled slowly. Relieved, but only slightly. Because financial disasters can destroy lives even without prison. After ending the call, I found Harold working in his study. He looked up as I entered. "How are you holding up?" The question caught me off guard, because nobody had asked me that in a very long time. Not really." I sat across from him. "Tired." He smiled softly. "That's understandable." For several moments, we simply talked. Not about Ethan, not about debt, not about legal issues, just life, old memories, funny stories, books, travel, the weather, normal things, simple things, and for the first time in years, I felt peaceful. Truly peaceful. Then Harold surprised me. "Do you know what I regret most?" I looked up. "What?" He leaned back thoughtfully. "Losing 40 years. The answer hit me harder than I expected. Because I knew exactly what he meant. 40 years of friendship, and so 40 years of missed conversations, 40 years stolen by misunderstandings. I smiled sadly. "So do I." Harold nodded. Then he said something I would never forget. "Life is shorter than people realize." The room fell silent. Not an awkward silence. A meaningful one. Because at our age, those words carried weight. Carried. Real weight. You begin measuring time differently when you understand how precious it is. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. My phone rang. The screen displayed Ethan's name. For several seconds, I stared at it, then answered. Hello. His voice sounded different. Again, not desperate this time, not manipulative, mate, just tired. Mom, I waited. I met with a lawyer. I said nothing. I wanted you to know. Still nothing. Then he surprised me. I also sold the cars. I blinked. What? The luxury cars? For the first time in months, now there was no performance in his voice. No strategy. No agenda. Just facts. I sold both of them. I didn't know what to say. He continued. The country club membership is gone too. Silence. The vacation property is being listed. Another pause. Then, I'm trying. 3 simple words. I'm trying. My eyes filled with tears. Because for the first time in a very long while, it sounded like he was finally taking responsibility. Not shifting blame, not making excuses, not demanding rescue, working, trying, owning his mistakes. It didn't erase what happened. Nothing could, but it mattered more than he realized. Then came the hardest part. Mom. I waited. I'm sorry. This time it felt different. Very different. Not rehearsed, not calculated, not attached to a request. Just an apology. Raw. Broken. Human. My throat tightened. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Then Ethan's voice cracked. I don't know how I became this person. The confession shattered me. Because it sounded honest. Painfully honest. And suddenly I realized something. He had been lying to himself almost as much as he had been lying to everyone else. The success, the image, the lifestyle, the status. He had chased those things so aggressively that somewhere along the way, he lost himself. I closed my eyes, remembering Richard, remembering the values we tried to teach him. Honesty, humility, responsibility, kindness. Somehow those lessons had gotten buried. But perhaps they weren't completely gone. Maybe they were simply waiting to be rediscovered. Ethan. Yeah, are you willing to tell the entire truth? His answer came immediately. Yeah. No hesitation. No excuses. Just yes. For the first time, I believed him. The following week became a whirlwind of meetings. Lawyers, financial advisors, creditors, accountants, documents, endless documents. The process wasn't pleasant. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. And honesty changes everything, gradually. The full picture emerged. The debt was enormous, but not impossible. Many assets could be liquidated. Payment plans could be negotiated. Settlements could be reached. The situation was serious, but not hopeless. Most importantly, the house remained protected. Untouched, safe. Richard's final gift had survived. One evening after another long day of meetings, I stood alone on the back patio at Harold's estate. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold. Beautiful. Peaceful. Healing. Harold joined me a few minutes later. Neither of us spoke at first. Eventually, he smiled. "You look different." I laughed softly. "Good different or bad different?" "Good." I looked toward the horizon. "I feel different." Because it was true. The pain was still there. The betrayal still hurt. The scars still existed. But something else had appeared. Freedom. For years I had carried guilt that wasn't mine. Responsibility that wasn't mine. Fear that wasn't mine. Now those burdens were finally falling away. Harold looked at me thoughtfully. "You know something." "What?" "Richard would be proud of you." The words nearly brought me to tears. Because deep down, that was all I had ever wanted. To honor the life we built. To protect the values we shared. To remain the woman he loved. I smiled through wet eyes. And for the first time since the stormy night Ethan threw me out, I genuinely believed the future might still hold something beautiful. I just didn't realize how beautiful it was about to become. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. If someone had told me on the night Ethan threw me out into the rain that I would eventually find peace, I would have never believed them. Back then, everything felt broken. My family, my trust, my future, even my sense of identity. For most of my life, I had defined myself as Ethan's mother. Everything revolved around that role. Every sacrifice, every decision, every dream I postponed. I had spent decades putting myself second, maybe even third, sometimes fourth. Anyone else's needs always came before mine. But after the storm, something unexpected happened. I started rediscovering who Bonnie Perkins actually was. Not someone's widow, not someone's mother, not someone's financial safety net, just Bonnie, and it felt surprisingly wonderful. The legal and financial mess surrounding Ethan continued for months. There were meetings, negotiations, settlements, repayment plans. The process wasn't easy. In fact, there were days when it seemed impossible. But little by little, progress happened, not because someone rescued him, because Ethan finally stopped running. For the first time in years, he faced consequences directly. And consequences have a way of teaching lessons that comfort never can. One afternoon, Susan called with an update. Ethan signed the final restructuring agreement. I smiled. "That's good." "It is." She paused. "He's working very hard." That didn't surprise me. Over the previous months, I had seen remarkable changes. The luxury lifestyle disappeared. The expensive image vanished. The status symbols were gone. And strangely enough, Ethan seemed more genuine without them, more human, more like the boy I remembered. The first time I truly noticed the difference happened during a visit to a construction site. He had asked if we could meet, not to discuss money, not to discuss legal documents, just to talk. I agreed. When I arrived, I barely recognized him. His designer suits were gone. Instead, he wore work boots, jeans, a reflective safety vest. Dust covered his clothes. Sweat covered his forehead. For a moment, I simply stared. This was the same man who once obsessed over luxury watches and expensive cars. Now he was hauling materials alongside construction crews. Actually working. Actually earning. Actually rebuilding. The sight made my heart ache. Not because I pitied him, because I was proud of him. For the first time in years, he wasn't pretending. He wasn't chasing appearances. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply doing what needed to be done. That day we ate lunch sitting on overturned buckets near the work site. Simple sandwiches, bottled water, nothing fancy. And somehow it was one of the best conversations we'd had in years. No manipulation, no hidden agenda, just honesty. At one point, Ethan looked down at his hands. They were rough, scraped, calloused. Then he laughed. I haven't worked this hard since college. I smiled. It suits you. His expression softened. I think I forgot who I was. The admission lingered between us. Because deep down, we both knew it was true. Success hadn't ruined Ethan overnight. It had happened gradually. One compromise, one shortcut, one bad decision at a time. Until eventually he became someone neither of us recognized. But now he was finding his way back. Slowly, painfully, honestly. Meanwhile, my own life continued changing in beautiful ways. Harold remained by my side through everything. At first, our relationship felt like two old friends reconnecting after decades apart. Then something deeper began to grow. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, naturally. Like a flower blooming after a long winter. We spent afternoons walking through parks, evenings talking on the patio, weekends exploring small towns throughout Ohio. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to enjoy life without guilt. That was harder than it sounds. Women like me often spend their entire lives caring for everyone else. Learning to care for yourself feels almost selfish. But Harold helped me understand something important. Self-respect isn't selfish. Healing isn't selfish. Joy isn't selfish. One evening, we sat together watching the sun set. The sky glowed orange and purple. Beautiful. Peaceful. Harold smiled. You know something? What? You laugh more now. I laughed immediately. Do I? Much more. I thought about it. He was right. I did. Not because life was perfect, because I was finally living instead of merely surviving. Several weeks later, another surprising phone call arrived. It was Ethan. Mom. Hi. His voice sounded nervous. What is it? There was a long pause. Then, I'd like you to come see something. The request surprised me. What? You'll understand when you get here. The next afternoon, I drove to the address he provided. When I arrived, I found an old community center undergoing renovation, so the building had clearly seen better days. Peeling paint, aging infrastructure, years of neglect. But workers were everywhere, repairing, painting, improving, transforming. I found Ethan inside. He looked happier than I'd seen him in years. Not wealthy, not successful. Happy. There's a difference. He led me through the building, showing me classrooms, activity rooms, meeting spaces. Then he stopped. This project matters. I looked around. Why? His eyes became emotional. Because this place helps families. My throat tightened. Of course it did. The old Ethan would have calculated profit margins. The new Ethan was thinking about people. Finally, he looked at me. "You're the reason." I blinked. "What?" He smiled sadly. "Watching you lose everything because of my choices changed me." Tears filled my eyes. Because for the first time, I truly believed him. Not because of his words, because of his actions. Actions reveal character far better than promises ever can. Then something happened that surprised both of us. He hugged me, not awkwardly, not out of obligation, the way he used to when he was young, the way sons hug mothers when they feel safe, the way sons hug mothers when they understand how close they came to losing them forever. I held him tightly, and for the first time since the storm, I felt genuine healing. Not complete healing. Some wounds never disappear entirely for a but healing nonetheless. That evening, I returned to Harold's estate feeling lighter than I had in years. As I walked through the front door, Harold looked up from his chair. One glance at my face and he smiled. "Good day," I smiled back. "The best." And for the first time since everything began, I genuinely believed that our family might actually survive. Not unchanged, not unscarred, but stronger, wiser, and finally built on truth. A year after the night Ethan threw me out into the rain, I stood on the front porch of my home and watched the sun rise over the neighborhood. My home. Not because of legal documents, not because of court decisions, because I had finally reclaimed my life. The morning air was cool and peaceful. Birds sang from nearby trees. The world felt calm. For a long time, I simply stood there holding a cup of coffee and appreciating something I once took for granted. Peace. Real peace. The kind that comes only after surviving a storm. The kind that cannot be purchased, cannot be inherited, cannot be borrowed. It has to be earned, and we had all paid a heavy price to find it. Over the previous year, remarkable things had happened. Not perfect things, not magical things, real things. Human things. The kind of changes that occur when people finally choose truth over pride. Ethan continued rebuilding his life. Slowly, steadily. One honest step at a time. The repayment agreements remained difficult. The financial consequences remained significant. But he never ran from them again. He worked. Sometimes 7 days a week, sometimes 14-hour days, sometimes longer. And little by little, progress appeared. The creditors began receiving payments. Projects were completed. Obligations were reduced. Trust slowly returned. Not immediately. Trust never returns immediately. But it returns. One action at a time. One honest decision at a time. One difficult day at a time. The relationship between Ethan and me also continued healing. Slowly, carefully. Like repairing a priceless antique that had been shattered. You can't rush that process. And you can't pretend the damage never happened. We talked often. Sometimes over lunch. Sometimes over the phone. Sometimes during long walks. There were still difficult conversations. Painful memories. Uncomfortable truths. But there was honesty now. And honesty changes everything. One afternoon, Several months after our reconciliation began, Ethan invited me to visit the renovated community center again. The transformation was extraordinary. Bright classrooms, beautiful gathering spaces, programs for families, activities for seniors, resources for struggling parents. Life, hope, purpose everywhere. As we walked through the building, children laughed in nearby rooms, volunteers moved through the hallways, families gathered together. The place felt alive. Then Ethan showed me a small plaque mounted near the entrance. At first, I didn't understand why he seemed nervous. Then I read it. The Community Renewal Project dedicated to the values of compassion, sacrifice, and unconditional love. In honor of Bonnie Perkins. My eyes immediately filled with tears. Ethan. His voice shook slightly. You spent your entire life helping people. I couldn't speak. You deserved something that reflected that. The tears came freely now. Not sad tears, healing tears. The kind that arrive when old wounds finally begin closing. I hugged him. And in that moment, I felt something beautiful. Forgiveness, not forgetting, never forgetting. Forgiveness. There's a difference. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It doesn't erase pain. It simply releases the burden of carrying hatred forever. And I was finally ready to let that burden go. Several weeks later, another chapter of my life quietly reached a turning point. It happened on an ordinary Sunday evening. Harold and I were sitting on the back patio of his estate, watching the sunset. The same place where we had spent countless hours talking over the past year. The same place where friendship had slowly become something deeper, something stronger, something unexpected. The sky glowed with shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful. Timeless. Harold sat quietly beside me. Then he smiled. You know, Bonnie, I've waited a very long time. I laughed softly. For what? His eyes met mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he answered. For a second chance. My heart immediately understood what he meant. The 40 years. The missed opportunities. The lost friendship. The reunion. Everything. Harold reached into his pocket. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just simply. Then he handed me a small velvet box. I stared at it, completely speechless. His smile widened. Before you panic, let me finish. I laughed through tears. The nervousness in his voice was oddly adorable. Okay. He took a deep breath. I don't need a wedding. I smiled. I don't need a ceremony. More tears. I don't need anything complicated. Then his expression softened. I just don't want to waste any more time. The words struck directly at my heart. Because at our age, time means something different. You stop assuming there will always be more of it. You stop postponing joy. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You simply choose happiness when it arrives. Harold opened the box. Inside was a simple ring. Elegant. Beautiful. Perfect. He looked directly at me. Would you spend the rest of our time together? Not the rest of our lives. The rest of our time. The distinction mattered because it was honest, real, human, and somehow even more romantic. I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't stop smiling. And eventually I managed to answer, "Yes." Harold laughed. I laughed. And for the first time in decades, I felt completely whole. Months later, our family gathered together for a celebration, not a wedding, something simpler, something that felt more like us. Close friends, family members, laughter, stories, love. Even Ethan attended. He arrived early to help with preparations. Watching him work beside Harold filled me with gratitude, because a year earlier, I would have thought such a scene impossible. Yet there they were, talking, laughing, building something healthier than what existed before. Life has a strange way of surprising us. Sometimes the worst night of your life becomes the doorway to your best years. The night Ethan threw me into the rain felt like an ending. But it wasn't. It was a beginning. A painful beginning. A heartbreaking beginning. But a beginning nonetheless. I lost the illusion that love means rescuing people from every consequence. I lost the habit of sacrificing myself for everyone else's comfort. I lost the fear of putting my own happiness first. And in losing those things, I gained something far more valuable. Self-respect, peace, family restored through truth, and a second chance at love. As I look back now, I no longer remember the rain first. I remember the Bentley. I remember the kindness. I remember the friend who showed up when I needed someone most. And I remember discovering that sometimes life saves its greatest blessings for the moment after you think everything is lost. Life has a way of teaching us difficult lessons when we least expect them. Sometimes the people we love disappoint us. Sometimes trust is broken. Sometimes sacrifices go unappreciated. And sometimes the very people we would give everything for end up hurting us the most. But this story is not really about betrayal. It is about resilience. Bonnie's journey reminds us that love should never require us to abandon our self-respect. Helping family is admirable, but enabling destructive behavior is not. There comes a moment when kindness must be balanced with boundaries. Another important lesson is that truth eventually finds its way into the light. Lies may survive for a season, manipulation may work for a while. But honesty has a remarkable ability to outlast deception. This story also reminds us that people can change. Ethan made terrible mistakes. He caused pain. He betrayed trust. Yet, when he finally accepted responsibility, genuine transformation became possible. Redemption begins when excuses end. And perhaps the most beautiful lesson of all is that life is never truly over until it is over. Bonnie believed her best years were behind her. She believed love, friendship, and new beginnings belonged to younger people. She was wrong. Sometimes the greatest blessings arrive later in life. Sometimes healing appears after heartbreak. Sometimes a closed door leads to a better path. And sometimes a stormy night becomes the first chapter of a beautiful new future. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to forgive someone who deeply hurt you? Do you believe people can truly change after making serious mistakes? Please share your experience or opinion in the comments below, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more emotional storytelling journeys. Thank you for spending this time with me.